When Milo suggested a cooking workshop, I agreed immediately. It sounded like the kind of thing couples did in indie rom-coms. The ones where quirky music plays while they toss flour at each other and fall in love all over again. The workshop was called Savor the Mediterranean, promising 3 hours of olive oil, fresh herbs, and something called spanakopita, which I knew only vaguely as that spinach thing. It sounded fancy enough to impress Instagram, but not so daunting as to end in tears. Or so I thought. We arrived at a small cooking studio tucked behind an Italian deli, the air already heavy with garlic and basil. Inside, mismatched aprons hung from hooks, and each station had a gleaming array of ingredients waiting for us. The instructor, Sophia, was a whirlwind of curls and enthusiasm, her accent lending everything she said an air of authority. "Cooking is storytelling," she declared, sweeping her arms wide. "Every dish has its own rhythm, its own life." Milo clapped like a kid at a magic show. I smiled, but I was already looking at the recipe card, trying to absorb the steps before we started. Sophia gave us a quick rundown of the night's menu. We'd be making spanakopita and a simple Greek salad, followed by a honey-soaked dessert called galactobarico. "The key," she said, "is intuition. Feel the food. Trust yourself." I nodded, but I was already mentally cataloging the exact quantities listed on the card. A tablespoon of dill, 2 cloves of garlic. Exactly. No guesswork. Milo leaned over. "You ready, Master Chef?" he teased. I elbowed him lightly, grinning. "I'm ready to not embarrass us." We started with the filling for the spanakopita. The recipe called for wilting spinach and mixing it with feta, dill, and nutmeg. Easy enough. I focused, tossing spinach in the pan with just the right amount of olive oil. Milo, meanwhile, was tossing it on the counter. "It's alive," he said, laughing as the leaves popped and sizzled. "It's spinach." I deadpanned, scooping an errant handful back into his pan. Not a circus act. When we moved on to layering the phyllo dough, things escalated. Sophia demonstrated how to brush each delicate sheet with olive oil, her movements elegant and practiced. I followed suit, treating the dough with reverence, but Milo attacked as like he was slapping sunscreen on a toddler. "Gentle," I hissed. "It tears easily." "It's fine," he said, shrugging as a corner ripped. "No one's going to see the bottom." My jaw tightened. "The layers matter," I replied through clenched teeth. "They're what make it flaky." He grinned. "I thought you were the flaky one." I ignored him, focusing on making my spanakopita a work of art. Milo, meanwhile, had started improvising. "What if we add sun-dried tomatoes?" he said, reaching for a jar from the communal counter. "That's not in the recipe," I said, alarmed. "Yeah, but it'll be good," he insisted. "Tomatoes make everything better." "It's not your recipe to change," I snapped louder than I meant to. A couple at the next station glanced over. Milo raised his eyebrows at me, but put the jar back. The Greek salad was next, and I thought it would be impossible to mess up. It was just cucumbers, tomatoes, red onions, olives, and feta. But Milo decided to chop the vegetables into enormous chunks that looked like they were meant for a stew. "You're supposed to dice them," I said, holding up a neat cube of cucumber for reference. "They're rustic," he said, popping a piece of feta into his mouth. "Rustic isn't a substitute for wrong," I replied, more sharply than I intended. By the time we reached dessert, the tension between us was thick enough to cut with Sophia's chef's knife. Galactobarico was apparently some kind of custard pie wrapped in phyllo dough. "Phyllo again," Milo muttered, shooting me a pointed look. I ignored him, determined to prove I could master the tricky layers. The custard came together perfectly, creamy and fragrant with vanilla. But as I carefully draped the phyllo over the filling, Milo decided to drizzle honey on top of the raw dough. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed, horrified. "It's going in the oven anyway," he said, as if that explained everything. "You're going to ruin it." "Or," he said, smirking, "I'm going to make it better." We were the last ones to finish, and Sophia came by to inspect our efforts. She examined my spanakopita, giving a small nod of approval. "Very traditional," she said. "The layers are well done." I glowed under the praise. Then she turned to Milo's plate. His spanakopita looked like someone had sat on it, but Sophia smiled anyway. "Ah," she said, "you have fun with it." "Good." I bristled. "Fun? Wasn't she going to point out that he'd butchered it? When we finally sat down to eat, I took a bite of my spanakopita. It was good. Flaky, balanced, just as Sophia had described. But Milo's was surprisingly delicious. The sun-dried tomatoes he'd snuck into his filling added a sweet, savory kick that somehow worked. Not bad, huh, he said, watching me. I hated to admit it, but I nodded. Yeah, not bad. He grinned, triumphant. Rustic wins. On the walk home, we replayed the night, laughing at our kitchen antics. But part of me still felt conflicted. Was I too rigid? Did I suck the joy out of it by trying to get everything perfect? Or was Milo too cavalier, treating something beautiful like a free-for-all? Cooking was supposed to bring us closer, but tonight it felt like we'd been working against each other. Now I'm sitting here, second-guessing everything, and I have to ask, AITA? The first sign was her silence. Normally, the ride home from school was a breathless monologue about science class experiments, the latest drama among her friends, or questions about random things like why the sky turns pink at sunset. But that day, she said nothing. I caught glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, her jaw tight, her eyes staring out the window as if she could will herself invisible. It wasn't until we got home, and she dropped her backpack on the floor with a weight that felt heavier than its contents, that I noticed the uneven hack job to her hair. Sweetheart. My voice came out softer than I intended, startled by the jagged ends where her ponytail used to be. What happened? She froze mid-step. Her fingers clenched in a fist by her sides, and then the words came spilling out, rapid and trembling. They said I'm a throwaway. They said nobody wanted me, so why should I care how I look? And then her voice broke, and she gestured helplessly to her hair. They just cut it. My heart shattered. The grief and rage were instant and suffocating, a tidal wave crashing through me. I crouched down, gently tugging her toward me. Who did this? I already knew the answer. It was the same group of kids we'd been complaining about to the school for weeks. They laughed, Dad. They laughed like it was funny. Her words were barely audible, but they struck like thunder in my ears. I held her close, her small body trembling against mine. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I promise you, this isn't going to happen again. I'll make sure of it. But the truth was, I'd already tried. Mark and I had sent emails, made phone calls, even marched into the principal's office demanding answers. Every time, we got the same scripted response. We're looking into it. Weeks had passed, and looking into it had accomplished nothing. And now this. My daughter's hair wasn't the only thing they'd cut. They'd taken a piece of her confidence, too. That night, Mark and I sat at the dining table long after she'd gone to bed. He was pacing, his anger radiating off him in waves. We've done everything we can, he said, his voice tight. The school doesn't care. The parents don't care. What do they expect us to do? Just sit here and let this keep happening? No, I said firmly. They expect us to back down, and we're not going to. The next day, I started making calls. The lawyer we spoke to didn't mince words. This isn't just bullying anymore, she said. Cutting her hair without consent? That's assault. And if the school has been negligent in addressing the bullying, they're liable too. Hearing it framed so starkly made my chest tighten. Assault. Negligence. These weren't just buzzwords. They were a spotlight on the school's failures and the pain my daughter had endured. For once, I felt less like a powerless parent and more like someone armed with a sliver of control. When the school caught wind of our intent to pursue legal action, the tone changed immediately. The principal called, his voice dripping with forced concern. We're taking this very seriously, he assured me. The student responsible has been moved to a different class. A different class? I snapped. You think shuffling her around like a bad game of musical chairs is a solution? What about the teacher who stood by and let this happen? What about the system that let it escalate this far? He stammered something about policy reviews and additional training, but I wasn't interested in promises anymore. I was interested in accountability. Then came the call from the bully's parents. The mother sounded apologetic, but there was an undertone of exasperation, like she thought we were making too big a deal out of it. We're sorry for what happened, she said, but kids can be cruel sometimes. They don't always understand the consequences of their actions. Your kid held scissors to mine and cut her hair, I said, my voice low and even. Don't tell me she didn't understand what she was doing. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her tone was clipped. Well, we'll be sure to talk to her. Talk to her? I repeated, incredulous. That's it. She's just a child, the mother snapped, as if that absolved everything. So is my daughter, I shot back, my anger bubbling over. And she's the one who's been tormented. But don't worry, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. By the time we officially filed suit, the school had gone into full damage control mode. They sent out emails to parents about revised anti-bullying initiatives and scheduled meetings with administrators. It felt performative, a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. But for the first time, the power wasn't theirs anymore. It was ours. The legal battle was exhausting. Every step felt like reliving the trauma, but it was also a process of reclamation for my daughter and for us. The school eventually settled, agreeing to overhaul their policies and discipline the staff involved. The bully's family, after some posturing, settled too. But this wasn't just about the settlements or the apologies. It was about the message. My daughter wasn't invisible, and her pain wasn't negotiable. Months later, I watched her walk into her new school with her head held high, her hair starting to grow back, and a spark of confidence returning to her eyes. She wasn't the same as before, and maybe she never would be. But she was resilient. She was brave. And most importantly, she knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that we'd fight for her every step of the way. That night, as I tucked her in, she reached up and hugged me tightly. You kept your promise, she whispered. Always, I said. And I'm in it. Always. The monks told me they prayed while they brewed. To bless the process, they said. I didn't tell them I prayed over my first sip. Not for blessings, but for forgiveness. Or maybe understanding. Or maybe just for him to somehow hear me. The abbey was impossibly quiet, nestled deep in the Belgian countryside, surrounded by fields of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The beer they made here was supposed to be special. Rare, the guide had said, like it was some golden ticket. But as I sat under the arch of a stone alcove with a frothy glass in my hand, all I felt was the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. The beer was a promise, and now that I was drinking it, the promise was broken. I swirled the glass absently, watching the bubbles rise. You better be laughing, I muttered, imagining him watching me from wherever he was. Laughing your ass off, saying, told you you'd chicken out and get all emotional. My throat tightened. Well, screw you, kid. I'm here, aren't I? The journey had started with a fight, a bad one. My ex, leaning over the kitchen counter, telling me I was petty, selfish, a disgrace. You're gonna blow it all? She'd yelled. His college fund? I didn't yell back. I didn't have the energy. It was his. Not yours, not mine. His. And he knew exactly what I'd do if this happened. This isn't some joke, she snapped. People die, and you think the answer is a beer tour? It's not just beer, I said so quietly she almost didn't hear me. It's him. Her expression shifted then, just for a second, a flicker of something softer. She didn't argue after that, but she didn't forgive me either. I left a week later with a single bag and a notebook I hadn't opened in years. I wrote in it on the plane pages of scribbled half-thoughts and memories. The way he'd light up when talking about physics, how he beat me at chess at 11, his dumb obsession with banana-flavored candy. Writing felt like holding his hand again, just for a little while. In Belgium, the days stretched like the streets, winding and uneven. I visited the cathedrals he would have loved, their spires scraping the sky. I ate waffles too sweet for my own good and listened to street performers playing violins with wild abandon. But the beer, that was the centerpiece. Each brewery felt like stepping into a time machine, old stone walls and copper kettles that looked as though they'd been lifted straight out of the past. I met brewers with stories etched into their faces, and I listened, nodding along even when I didn't understand the language. But in every sip, I imagined him, sitting across from me, raising his glass and cracking some sarcastic joke about my lack of palate. Bruges was my last stop. I'd been saving it, not just for the beer, but for the place itself, a postcard city that felt like it existed outside time. I found a bench by the canal, shaded by an ancient willow tree, and pulled out the bottle I'd been saving. The rare one. The one he'd sent me a picture of years ago with the caption, Bucket list, Dad. Better start saving. I poured a glass, letting the golden liquid catch the evening light. I stared at it for a long time before taking a sip. It was good, damn good, but it wasn't about the taste. It was about the memory of him leaning against the fridge, talking about his plans for the future. I'm gonna see it all, he'd said. Everywhere, everything. And I'll drag you along if I have to. I guess I'm dragging myself, huh? I said aloud, and the words echoed strangely in the quiet. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the rooftops, writing in the notebook and drinking slowly, deliberately. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I started talking to him, half aloud, half in my head. I told him about the trip, about how I'd taken photos with his old camera, trying to see the world the way he did. I told him how the cobblestones were hell on my knees, but worth every step. And I told him I was sorry. For a lot of things, really. For the times I was too hard on him, for the nights I worked late instead of watching his school plays, for not saying I love you as much as I felt it. And most of all, for not being able to protect him from the senselessness of it all. By the time I finished the bottle, I felt lighter. Not healed, that wasn't the point, but like I'd given something of myself back to him. When I returned home, the world felt different. The house was still empty, but the silence didn't ache the way it used to. I took one of the photos I'd snapped in Bruges, a simple shot of the canal at dusk, and hung it in the living room. Below it, I placed the notebook, now half full, and the empty bottle from that night under the willow tree. I kept writing to him after that, filling the notebook with stories of the little moments. The neighbor's dog digging up my flower bed, the time I burned dinner trying to make lasagna from scratch, the songs that made me think of him. It became a habit, a thread tying me to him across the vast chasm of loss. The fun was gone, every penny spent, but I'd bought something far more valuable. Not just memories, but a way forward, a way to carry him with me in every step, every laugh, every sunrise. And if I close my eyes and listen hard enough, I swear I can hear him laughing. Monks and beer? Huh, Dad? Guess you finally got your wick. When my grandmother's eyesight finally failed her, it wasn't the gentle fade she had feared, but a sudden, cruel snatch. One morning, she could no longer see the sunrise over her garden, and the world became shadows and guesses. I remember her voice on the phone, quiet and small for the first time in my life. "Well, I suppose this is my new adventure," she said with a bitter chuckle, masking the fear I could feel even through the receiver. To everyone else, Grandma was a force, unyielding, razor-sharp, and proud. The kind of woman who baked pies that could win ribbons at county fairs and then shame the competition for showing up with store-bought crusts. She hated needing anyone, even in the small ways that age made inevitable. Now, the thought of relying on us for everything, walking, cooking, living, was unbearable to her. For me and my sister, Marissa, it was devastating. We sat in her living room a week after the diagnosis, surrounded by the clutter of her life. Floral plates on the walls, baskets of yarn she could no longer knit with. Marissa broke the silence first. "She'll move in with me," she announced as if the matter had already been settled. I raised an eyebrow. "You're already juggling work, the kids, and Alex's travel schedule. How are you going to manage Grandma too?" Marissa folded her arms. "I'll figure it out. She's family. We take care of our own." I exhaled sharply. "We can take care of her by hiring someone, a professional, someone who knows what they're doing." Marissa's face tightened, her jaw clenching like she was biting back the urge to yell. "What she needs is us. Someone who loves her, not some stranger who treats her like a paycheck." "And what happens when you're too exhausted to love her properly? Or when she needs more help than you can give?" I snapped back, trying not to let my frustration boil over. Grandma, who had been sitting quietly in her recliner, cleared her throat. "You do know I'm still in the room, right?" Her voice had that familiar steel, but there was a tremor beneath it that made my chest ache. "I don't want to live in anyone's house, and I don't want some nurse breathing down my neck. I'll manage." "Grandma," I said softly, "you can't see. You can't just manage." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hand fumbling on the armrest for something to grip. "Well, isn't that just a damn shame?" she muttered. "But I'm not ready to stop being me just because my eyes gave up." Marissa reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're not trying to take away your independence, Grandma. We just want to make sure you're okay." I sat back, watching them, the familiar knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. Marissa's plan was noble, heartfelt, but completely impossible. My sister had always been the nurturer, the one who believed sheer willpower could overcome any obstacle. And I had always been the pragmatist, the one who weighed risks and made cold, calculated choices. It was an old dance between us, one we had rehearsed 1,000 times over. The weeks that followed were a chaotic blur. Marissa started dropping by Grandma's house every day after work, helping her with meals, organizing her closet, and reading her favorite mysteries aloud. But it didn't take long for the strain to show. One night, after tucking Grandma into bed, Marissa called me in tears. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I mean, I love her, but she doesn't listen. She tries to do things on her own and ends up breaking plates or falling over chairs. And the boys don't understand why I'm never home anymore. Alex's work trips are piling up, and she cut herself off, sniffing hard. I'm failing her." "You're not failing her," I said firmly. "But you don't have to do this alone. Let's revisit the caregiver idea. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're making sure she's safe." There was a long pause, and then a sigh that sounded more like surrender. "She's going to hate it. Probably," I admitted. "But we're not doing this to make her happy in the short term. We're doing it to keep her here longer." The first time the caregiver, Rosa, showed up, Grandma acted like we'd hired an assassin. She refused to come out of her bedroom, claiming she had a headache. Marissa and I sat in the living room with Rosa, who had the patience of a saint, making polite conversation as if there wasn't an elderly woman whispering curses about her from the other side of the door. Eventually, Rosa won Grandma over, not with patience, but with sass. One afternoon, when Grandma accused her of rearranging the kitchen drawers, Rosa shot back. "Lady, I don't even have time to rearrange my own drawers. Stop blaming me for your bad memory." It was the first time in months I'd heard Grandma laugh. Over time, the arrangement settled into something that worked. Rosa handled the day-to-day tasks, cooking, cleaning, making sure Grandma didn't walk into furniture. And Marissa still came by every evening to read or play cards. I checked in on weekends, sometimes bringing Grandma's favorite apple turnovers from the bakery downtown. She still complained, of course, that Rosa doesn't know how to fold a fitted sheet, she'd grumble, or she hums too much while she's cleaning. But I could tell she was grateful in her own way. Even so, the guilt lingered. One night, Marissa and I sat on the porch after a particularly rough day. Grandma had been especially disoriented, mistaking me for her late husband and calling Marissa by our mother's name. "I keep thinking," Marissa said quietly, staring out into the darkness, "if I loved her more, maybe I could do this on my own." I looked at her, my chest tightening. "Maris, loving someone doesn't mean you have to destroy yourself for them. You're allowed to need help. It doesn't make your love any less real." She didn't respond, but I saw her wipe at her eyes before taking a shaky breath. In that moment, I realized we were both carrying the same weight, just in different ways. She felt guilty for not being able to do it all, and I felt guilty for not trying harder to. We'll probably never stop questioning ourselves, never stop wondering if we chose the right path. But when I see Grandma and Rosa sitting together, arguing over the best way to make lasagna, or when I hear her laugh as Marissa reads her a new book, I know we're doing our best. Still, some nights, I can't help but ask myself, The tickets arrived in a nondescript envelope, the kind you'd toss in the recycling without a second glance. But as soon as I saw the sender's name, my heart skipped. "You've been selected," the letter inside read. I had to read it 3 more times before it sank in. 2 passes to the Mirage Feast. Now, the Mirage Feast wasn't just an event. It was an urban legend, part pop-up dinner, part live performance, part no one really knew. Every year, in a different city, invitations would surface like whispers. No advertising, no official website, just this cryptic thing you'd hear about in dark corners of the internet. It was exclusive. It was weird, and it was exactly the kind of thing I lived for. I called Myra immediately. "Do you even understand how lucky we are?" I said, pacing my apartment. On the other end of the line, she laughed, soft and indulgent. "You mean how lucky you are?" I'm just along for the ride, babe. What even is this thing? Some kind of interactive buffet? It's an experience, Myra. I corrected her. A once-in-a-lifetime experience. The kind people would sell their souls for. Good thing mine's not for sale, she teased. So, what's the plan? The plan, I said, is to show up early. As early as possible. If we're lucky, they might let us in first. Maybe we'll see behind the curtain before the real show starts. She hummed in that non-committal way that usually meant she was trying to rein in my enthusiasm. Right? Or we could get there on time, skip the whole standing around in the cold part, and still have a great night. On time? I nearly dropped the phone. Myra, this isn't a movie. It's a moment. You can't just stroll in like you're late to brunch. Or, she countered, we can let the moment come to us. You're always trying to wrestle magic out of things, Val. Sometimes you just have to let it breathe. That was the thing about Myra. Where I wanted to grab the world with both hands, she preferred to watch it unfold. It was one of the reasons I adored her. And one of the reasons she made me want to scream. For the next week, we volleyed back and forth, trying to meet in the middle. Myra wanted to arrive just before our allotted time. A graceful entrance with minimal fuss. I wanted to camp out in front of the venue, soak up the anticipation, and crack the code of the event before anyone else. When the night arrived, our compromise felt uneasy at best. We left her place at 6, giving us an hour before the event officially started. Not as early as I'd wanted, but not as late as she'd pushed for. The venue was an abandoned greenhouse on the edge of the city, its silhouette jagged and alien against the skyline. Strings of dim, flickering lights led us toward the entrance, where a small crowd had already gathered. This isn't bad, Myra said, adjusting her scarf against the chill. It could have been better, I muttered, eyeing the people at the front of the line. They looked smug, the kind of smug you get from being closer to the action than everyone else. As we waited, the air around us seemed to thrum with something electric. Occasionally, a figure in a dark cloak would emerge from the greenhouse, whisper a name, and lead someone inside. The rest of us murmured in hushed excitement, speculating about what awaited us beyond the glass doors. This is it, I whispered to Myra. This is the magic, the build-up, the mystery. She glanced at her phone, unbothered. Or it's a lot of hype and cold feet. Eventually, it was our turn. A man with silver-threaded hair and eyes like he hadn't slept in years stepped forward, motioning us inside. The interior of the greenhouse was nothing short of surreal. Tables floated, suspended mid-air by invisible wires. Strange, unidentifiable scents wafted through the space, sweet and metallic. Shadows flickered across the walls, too large and too fast to be caused by any human. A string quartet played a song that seemed to loop in on itself endlessly. Myra nudged me. Okay, I'll admit, this is pretty cool. Pretty cool, I hissed. This is unreal. But the night didn't go the way I'd imagined. Every table was a puzzle, every dish an enigma. A server would appear at your side, deliver a plate of something indescribable, and vanish before you could ask a question. Notes written on rice paper were hidden under glasses, offering cryptic instructions. Eat the petals before the seeds. Do not drink the liquid. Offer your knife to the stranger at table 7. I wanted to dive in, figure out every clue, solve every mystery. Myra? Not so much. This isn't an escape room, she said, laughing softly as I scrawled notes on my napkin. Why are you treating it like homework? Just enjoy it. This isn't about enjoying it, I whispered fiercely. It's about unlocking it, experiencing everything. You're missing the point. She arched an eyebrow at me. Am I? Or are you missing the point by trying so hard to force one? Her words stung, mostly because part of me knew she was right, but I couldn't let go. Not when there was so much to uncover, so much I might miss if I didn't push harder. By the end of the night, we were sitting at opposite ends of the same table, figuratively and literally. I was knee-deep in theories about the overarching narrative, scouring for hidden connections between the server's movements and the musical loops. Myra, meanwhile, had found a group of guests who wanted to drink their mystery cocktails and laugh about the absurdity of it all. On the drive home, we were silent, the night sitting between us like a third passenger. I had fun, Myra said finally, her voice soft. Yeah, I replied, staring out the window. Me too. But the truth? I wasn't sure if either of us really had the night we wanted. Now, I can't stop wondering, was I wrong for needing it to be everything I dreamed of? Or was Myra wrong for coasting through it? For not diving in when I needed her to? We both got what we came for. Or did we? Last Thursday, I woke up feeling victorious. After 2 weeks of stealthy planning, I had pulled off the impossible, crafting a night for Sam that would outshine anything we'd ever done together. The details were flawless. Dinner at Vincent's table, the swanky rooftop spot Sam had been hinting at for months, followed by a walk through the Botanical Gardens after dark light show. It wasn't just a date, it was a masterpiece. But the real cherry on top? I had arranged for the staff at the restaurant to prepare a custom dessert platter. Each treat was meant to symbolize a milestone in our relationship. A tiny macaron for our Paris trip, a mini cheesecake to honor the night we binged the Great British Bake Off, and decided we could totally open a bakery. We absolutely couldn't. And a chocolate mousse in a little teacup, the same kind we drank from during our first date at a hole-in-the-wall cafe. I even wrote out the story of each dessert for the chef to deliver to Sam personally. Sentimental, extravagant, borderline ridiculous. Perfect. By noon, everything was lined up. I just had to keep a poker face for a few more hours. I was finishing up emails at my desk when Sam texted. You're free tonight, right? Eyes. Oh no. My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, half expecting it to rewrite itself into something innocent like, let's just stay home and watch Netflix. But no, Sam was scheming. I typed back cautiously. Why? What's up? Sam replied almost instantly. Surprise plans? Just trust me. We're something comfy and sporty. Bring bug spray. Winky face. Bug spray. Bug spray? That was not a Vincent's table accessory. My mind spun. What could possibly involve bug spray and justify crashing into my meticulously crafted plans? I took a deep breath. Whatever Sam was up to, I had to play it cool. Okay. I texted back, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. But, what kind of surprise are we talking about here? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise. Just trust me, babe. You're gonna love it. I stared at my screen, torn between laughing and panicking. Sam sounded so confident, so pleased with themselves that I couldn't bear to ruin it. But my dinner plan, the teacup mousse. At 6 p.m., I got my first clue. Sam met me at the door with a wide grin, holding a cooler and a pair of camping chairs. My heart sank. Oh no, I said, unable to keep the words from tumbling out. Are we camping? Sam burst out laughing. No, nothing that intense. It's better. I found the perfect spot for us to stargaze. There's a meteor shower tonight. I even downloaded one of those apps to show us the constellations. I blinked, stunned into silence. Sam was proud, radiant even, and they continued, clearly thrilled with themselves. I packed snacks. Your favorite crackers, that cheese with the little truffle bits, and, drumroll, the peanut butter cookies you always steal from my stash. Their face was so open, so excited, that for a moment I forgot about my plan. Sam had done this for me, just as I'd been planning for them. But then I remembered the dinner reservations, the desserts, the story I'd written for the chef. I'd even picked out a specific wine for Sam, because it reminded me of the one we drank the night we watched the worst rom-com in existence and laughed until we cried. I couldn't just let all that go. Wow, I said finally, forcing a smile. You really went all out. Sam frowned, picking up on my hesitation. You don't sound excited. No, I am. I said quickly. It's just, well, I might have also planned something for tonight. Their eyes widened. You did? Yeah. I scratched the back of my neck, sheepish. I made reservations at Vincent's table. You know, that rooftop spot you've been wanting to try. Sam's face lit up briefly before their gaze darted to the cooler. Oh, wow. That's amazing. It's okay, I said quickly. We can pivot. The meteor shower sounds incredible, and it's not like we can reschedule the sky. But your plans, Sam trailed off, looking crestfallen. No, it's fine, I said, my voice catching. We'll stargaze. It's spontaneous, right? Romantic? Just promise me we can still grab burgers after or something, because if I'm eating peanut butter cookies for dinner, I'll need backup carbs." Sam cracked a smile, but it didn't reach their eyes. "I don't want to ruin your night, and I don't want to ruin yours," I said softly. For a moment, we just stood there, both holding onto our respective plans like life rafts. It was like we were at a crossroads, each of us desperate to make the other happy, but unsure how to let go without losing something. Then Sam's face shifted, like they'd made a decision. "Okay," they said slowly. "What if we do both?" "Both?" I asked, incredulous. "Yeah, we hit the restaurant first, just for drinks, so you don't lose the reservation, and then we drive to the stargazing spot. We could do dessert under the stars. I packed chocolate too." It was a ridiculous idea. We'd be cutting it close, rushing through drinks, driving half an hour out of town, and probably fighting off mosquitoes. But the way Sam looked at me, hopeful and determined, made me smile. "All right," I said. "Let's do it. But if the meteor shower's a bust, you owe me pizza." The evening turned into a chaotic, magical blend of both our plans. At the restaurant, we sipped cocktails and nibbled on appetizers while I quietly explained the significance of the desserts to Sam. They got misty-eyed when the teacup mousse arrived, insisting they take a dozen pictures before eating it. Then we bolted out the door, laughing as we scrambled into the car and sped toward the stargazing spot. By the time we set up the chairs and laid out the blanket, the first meteors streaked across the sky. We sat shoulder to shoulder, snacking on cheese and cookies, pointing out constellations we probably got wrong. When Sam leaned their head on my shoulder, I felt the kind of contentment you can't plan for, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. In the end, we didn't just combine our surprises. We made something better. Still, I wonder, AITA for dragging us through the chaos of the compromise? Or does it even matter? The first thing I noticed when I walked into their house was the pizza menu pinned to the fridge. It was the kind with cartoonishly large pepperonis and a smiling chef holding up a slice, like something out of a 90s TV commercial. The boys were already hyped, bouncing off the walls as if the mere idea of pizza had supercharged them. Their mom gave me a quick rundown before leaving. Bedtime at 8, make sure homework was done, and pay for the pizza with the cash on the counter. Simple enough. The delivery guy arrived within the hour, a box of cheese pizza and an order of breadsticks balanced precariously in his hands. "Smells amazing," I said without thinking, and he grinned as if I'd paid him the highest compliment. I set the food on the table and called the boys over. "Dinner's ready." They tore into it like miniature tornadoes, cheese stretching in long, gooey strands between bites. "Best babysitter ever," the younger one said, mouth half full, and I felt an unexpected swell of pride. I wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just making sure they didn't set the house on fire or forget their math worksheets. But kids have a way of making you feel like a superhero for the smallest things. After serving the boys, I hesitated for a moment. The smell of warm, cheesy perfection was hard to ignore, and honestly, I was starving. I grabbed 2 slices and a breadstick, figuring it was no big deal. Babysitters eat with the kids, right? It wasn't like I was raiding the pantry or polishing off a hidden stash of truffles. It was pizza. Everyone eats pizza. The boys didn't seem to care. They were more interested in debating the merits of pineapple as a topping. One was firmly against, the other argued it was the best thing ever. After they finished and ran off to play, I cleaned up the table, stacked the pizza box in the fridge, and double-checked their homework before starting the bedtime routine. By the time their parents got home, the house was calm, the boys were asleep, and I felt like I'd aced the evening. I gave them a quick rundown of the night, mentioning how much the boys loved the pizza. "What do you mean you loved it?" the mom asked, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. My stomach sank. "Oh, I had a couple of slices. I figured." "You ate the kids' dinner?" she interrupted, incredulous. Her husband, who'd been halfway through taking off his coat, stopped and turned to look at me. They ate plenty," I stammered. "There's still some left." Her expression was a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "We didn't expect you to eat our food." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt like I was back in high school, getting scolded for something I didn't even realize was against the rules. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said quickly, the heat rising in my face. I didn't think it would be an issue. They didn't say much else, just handed me my payment and thanked me curtly as I left. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts spiraling into 1,000 directions. Was I wrong? Was there some unspoken babysitter etiquette I'd missed? The thing was, I wasn't just embarrassed. I was angry. Babysitting wasn't just sitting on a couch scrolling through my phone while the kids entertained themselves. I'd fed them, cleaned up, made sure they brushed their teeth, and read bedtime stories. Wasn't it reasonable to assume I could have a slice of pizza while doing all that? Over the next few days, I started asking around, friends, family, even a group chat of fellow babysitters. Their reactions ranged from shock to outrage. Wait, they actually said that? One friend texted back, followed by a string of laughing emojis. What did they expect you to do, Star? Another sitter chimed in with a horror story of her own about a family who left her watching 3 kids for 10 hours with nothing but a bag of microwave popcorn. Some people just don't think, she wrote. It's not about the food. It's about respect. That last line stuck with me. Respect. It wasn't about the pizza. It was about how they saw me, not as someone helping raise their kids for an evening, but as an outsider who didn't belong at their table. A week later, they texted me, asking if I was available to babysit again. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'm sorry, I won't be able to babysit anymore, I wrote. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I added, I think it's best if you find someone whose expectations align more with yours. The next time I babysat for a different family, they greeted me at the door with a smile and a casual, "We've got pizza in the oven, so help yourself to whatever you want." That night, as I sat at their table, a slice of pepperoni in hand and 2 giggling kids arguing over whether Batman could beat Superman, I realized something. The right families don't just appreciate you. They make you feel at home. And that was worth more than all the pizza in the world. The night was supposed to be the one thing I got right this year. The past 12 months had been a slow-motion train wreck. I lost my job in March. By June, my boyfriend dumped me after 5 years with a text that started with, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." As a cherry on top, I moved back in with my parents to save money, which meant trading a walkable city life for suburban hell and the nightly soundtrack of my dad watching true crime shows at full volume. But tonight, I was going to forget all of that. I was going to reclaim a shred of myself by hosting the first dinner party in my parents' backyard since high school. It wasn't just a dinner party, it was a thing. I spent 2 weeks planning. The menu? Pinterest-worthy. Tapas with some homemade flair. The decor? Twinkling lights, fresh flowers, table runners, nothing store-bought. It was my way of proving that despite everything, I could still create something beautiful. By 7 p.m., everything was ready. The yard glowed like a scene from a romantic indie movie. The air smelled like roasted garlic, and I felt, for once, like someone who had their life together. My friends started to trickle in, first Lucy and Jake, then Marissa and Connor. By 7:30, everyone was seated, sipping sangria, complimenting the vibe. I started to think, maybe this will actually be perfect. Then Sarah arrived. Sarah was the kind of friend you keep in your life, because she's been there forever, not because you really like who she is now. We met in middle school, survived high school together, and after all that history, it just felt wrong to cut her loose. She had a way of making herself larger than life. Bigger laugh, bigger stories, bigger presence. And tonight, her entrance was no exception. She burst through the side gate, balancing a precariously large cake box in her arms. "Sorry I'm late," she called, loud enough to drown out the music. "I brought dessert." The table went quiet as everyone stared at her, then the box, and finally back to me. My plan had been simple. Tiramisu served in these adorable little glass jars I'd spent half a day assembling. I didn't need dessert help, but here she was, plopping her box onto my carefully set table like it was some kind of gift from the gods. "You are not ready for this," Sarah said, grinning as she lifted the lid. Inside was a massive, triple-tiered monstrosity covered in bright pink frosting and glittering gold sprinkles. "Tajda, isn't it amazing?" The table murmured polite compliments, but I saw the way their eyes lit up. The cake looked ridiculous, but it was exactly the kind of thing people gravitate toward. Loud, attention-grabbing, impossible to ignore. "Oh my God, Sarah, did you make this?" Lucy asked. Sarah laughed, flipping her hair. "Of course. Well, sort of. I took a decorating class a while ago, and I figured this was the perfect opportunity to practice." I sat there, frozen. This wasn't supposed to be the Sarah show. This was supposed to be about the little details I'd put my soul into. The handmade sangria, the place cards with calligraphy I'd spent hours on, the vibe I had curated down to the last candle. And now everyone was raving about her cake like it was the centerpiece of the entire evening. I bit my tongue, determined to stay gracious. After all, what kind of person gets mad about dessert? Wow, I said, forcing a smile. That's huge, Sarah. Thanks for bringing it. No problem, she said, beaming like I'd just handed her an award. Should we cut it now? I feel like it's too pretty to wait. Before I could respond, the group started cheering her on. Jake grabbed a knife. Marissa started filming for Instagram. And within minutes, plates of bright pink cake were being passed around. I stared at my untouched tiramisu jars, still lined up in neat little rows, utterly forgotten. I kept waiting for anyone, to notice my simmering frustration. Maybe Lucy would glance my way with a sympathetic shrug, or Jake would suggest saving the cake for later. But no one did. The conversation shifted, the cake became the night's unofficial mascot, and I was just there. When Sarah stood up to give a toast, that was the breaking point. She tapped her wine glass with a fork, smiling as if she were at her own birthday party. Okay, I just want to say how amazing it is that we're all here together, she began, her voice dripping with drama. And I have to shout out this cake because, honestly, it might be my best one yet. I think this is just a reminder to all of us that sometimes you just need to throw yourself into something new and see what happens, right? Everyone raised their glasses, cheering. I stayed seated, gripping my fork so tightly I thought it might snap. The audacity of her to turn my night into some kind of motivational TED talk about her cake was too much. Right, I said, cutting into the applause. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Or maybe it's a reminder to ask before hijacking someone else's evening. The table went silent. Sarah turned to me, blinking in confusion. What? I continued, setting down my fork. It's great that you're finding yourself or whatever, but this wasn't really about you. It was about the dinner I spent 2 weeks planning. Remember that? The tension was immediate, thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Sarah's face turned red. Not embarrassed red, but angry red. I wasn't hijacking anything, she said, her voice rising. I was just trying to add something fun to the night. I thought you'd be happy. Happy? I laughed, but it came out bitter. Sarah, you waltzed in here with a cake the size of a small car, completely overshadowed everything I worked on. And now you're acting like I should be grateful? Are you serious right now? She snapped. It's just a cake. It's not my fault if people liked it. You didn't give them a choice. I shot back. It's like you have to make everything about you. Every single time. Oh, come on, she said, throwing up her hands. You're being ridiculous. I'm being ridiculous? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the patio stones. You don't even realize how exhausting it is to deal with you. You just bulldoze into every situation without thinking about anyone else. Maybe try reading the room for once. The table was dead silent, everyone staring at us like they'd wandered into a live soap opera. Sarah grabbed her purse, her jaw tight. You know what? Maybe I shouldn't have come at all. Maybe you shouldn't have, I said. She stormed out, leaving the gate swinging behind her. The rest of the night limped along, but the magic was gone. People left earlier than planned, offering awkward goodbyes and half-hearted compliments about the tiramisu they hadn't touched. Now I'm sitting in the kitchen, staring at that damn cake box on the counter, wondering if I overreacted. Maybe I could have let it go. But at the same time, how many times can you let someone steal your moment before you finally say something? I didn't mean to become a puppet master. At least, that's not how I saw it at the time. But when it's your baby sister, your actual baby sister, sleepwalking toward disaster, what are you supposed to do? Stand by and let it happen? I'm sorry, but no. I wasn't built to be a bystander. It's just not in me. Ellie's always been the soft one in our family. The one who folds her arms across her chest like armor, but can't hold a grudge for longer than 3 hours. The one who cries at pet adoption commercials but still laughs when I trip on the curb. She's my polar opposite. Warm and open and forgiving to a fault. I've always loved that about her, but it also makes her a target. Some people can spot a generous soul from miles away, like sharks drawn to blood in the water. And last summer, One of those sharks found her. His name was Jace, but I called him Discount Lothario when he wasn't around. It fit. He had the greasy charm of someone who was just used to getting what he wanted. When Ellie first brought him around, he played the part of the doting boyfriend to perfection, smiling in all the right places, acting impressed by our family's painfully bad trivia nights, even washing the dishes without being asked. I was skeptical, sure, but I didn't go full conspiracy theorist on him. Not at first. The first crack showed a couple of months in when Ellie mentioned that Jace had a little debt he was working through. Harmless enough. But then there was the time she loaned him money for rent, and then for his car payment, and then, God help me, for a really amazing business opportunity that he absolutely swore would pay off soon. Meanwhile, Ellie's savings account? Circling the drain. I wanted to throttle him, but Ellie wouldn't hear it. "You don't understand, Leah," she'd say, her voice slipping into that defensive tone I'd come to hate. "Jace is just going through a rough patch." "Ellie, rough patches don't come with ATM fees." I shot back once. She didn't laugh. That was when I realized it wasn't a joke to her. It was her reality. She wasn't just being generous, she was all in. And when someone's all in, you can't just yank them back. You have to be subtle, strategic, surgical, which is why, when Ellie invited me to their 3-month anniversary dinner, I decided to take action. The dinner was at this overly trendy fusion restaurant where the cocktails came in mason jars and the appetizers were served on slabs of slate. I went alone, under the guise of wanting to get to know Jace better. What I really wanted was to study him, to pick apart his charm, until I found the loose thread holding it together. I didn't have to look far. Within 10 minutes, Jace was telling some long-winded story about how he almost made it as a pro gamer before corporate sponsorships ruined the scene. I managed to keep my face neutral, barely, but when Ellie excused herself to the restroom, I made my move. "So, Jace," I said, leaning in slightly, "what's your endgame here?" He blinked, his smile flickering. Sorry?" "With Ellie," I clarified. "She's smart, sweet, way too good for someone who can't hold a job or pay his own bills." "So what's your plan?" "Charm her into buying you a house." Jace chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Wow, you're direct, huh?" "I'm protective, corrected, and I see through people. So maybe think twice before you try anything shady with my sister." The conversation ended when Ellie came back, and Jace returned to his overly rehearsed boyfriend act. But the look he gave me, half amusement, half annoyance, stayed with me. He wasn't scared. He wasn't embarrassed. He was calculating. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to win this fight by playing fair. What happened next was, I admit, kind of a scorched earth strategy. I started with social media. Jace's accounts were a goldmine of questionable flexes. Photos of him holding bottles of champagne in clubs, cryptic posts about how only the weak pay taxes, even a shot of him posing next to a rented Lamborghini with a caption that read, "Manifesting this life fired." I screenshotted everything. Then I went deeper. A late-night Google search led me to a Reddit thread where someone calling themselves Jace the Ace had posted a step-by-step guide on leveraging relationships for financial stability. I didn't know for sure it was him, but come on, what were the odds? I saved that too. Armed with my dossier, I called Ellie over to my apartment one Friday night. I told her I'd made nachos, which I knew would lure her in. It's her kryptonite. When she showed up, I sat her down, handed her my laptop, and said, "You need to see this." She was confused at first, then angry, then silent. I thought I'd gotten through to her, but when she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. "How dare you?" "Ellie," I said, baffled. "This is who Jace really is." "No," she snapped. "This is who you think he is. You don't know him like I do." "Ellie, he's using you," I said, my voice rising. "He's playing you like a fiddle, and you're letting him. That's not your call to make," she shouted, standing up so abruptly the nachos almost spilled. "You don't get to control my life." Before I could argue, she stormed out. That was 2 months ago. Ellie hasn't spoken to me since, except for a terse text saying, "You crossed the line." I heard through the family grapevine that she and Jace are still together. Apparently, they're working through some things. And me? I'm left here wondering if I did the right thing or if I just shoved her deeper into his orbit. I thought I was protecting her, but maybe I was just trying to control her. When Alex first started coming around, I didn't pay much attention. He was just another lanky teenage boy with that mop of unkempt hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. My daughter was over the moon, and that was what mattered, or so I thought. It wasn't until pizza night that I started noticing the cracks. I made a big deal of it. Friday, movies, and extra-large pizzas piled with toppings. A little family bonding with Alex tagging along. I'd even gone out of my way to grab an extra pepperoni, knowing teenage boys could inhale slices like vacuum cleaners. When I came back with the boxes, the smell of melted cheese and garlic filling the house. Alex looked up from his spot on the couch, nodded vaguely, and left. Just like that. No explanation, no thanks for the food, not even a muttered excuse. He was just gone. Is he okay? I asked my daughter as I set the pizzas on the counter. She shrugged like it was no big deal. Yeah, he's fine. Probably just forgot something. But her voice wavered. Something was off. The next time was worse. My daughter's birthday dinner. We booked a cozy little restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and overpriced pasta. It was supposed to be a special evening, her first boyfriend at a family event. Alex arrived looking uncomfortable but determined. I figured he was just nervous. He ordered a chicken parmesan and sat quietly while we chatted, mostly ignoring him. When the food came, he stared at it like it had personally insulted him, then excused himself to the restroom. He didn't come back. Not for 30 minutes. I checked my watch, then the door, then my daughter, who was twisting her napkin in her lap. Maybe he's not feeling well, she murmured, cheeks pink. Eventually, Alex reappeared, pale and clammy, and sat down as though nothing had happened. His chicken parmesan sat untouched, congealing under the dim restaurant lighting. My husband flagged the waiter for a box. Alex didn't even thank him. By now, I'd had it. My daughter loved this boy. Sure, but his presence was turning every meal into an exercise in awkwardness. I decided to give it one last try. The four of us went hiking one Saturday, a picture-perfect autumn day. The air smelled like pine and fallen leaves, and even Alex seemed to loosen up. By the end, we were starving, so I suggested stopping at a diner we loved. It was a small place, nothing fancy, burgers, fries, milkshakes. Comfort food. We slid into a booth, and I grabbed the menus. Order whatever you want, I said, eager to turn this into a moment that might redeem him. My daughter grinned at Alex, nudging him playfully. He smiled back, but didn't pick up the menu. I'm good, he said. You're not hungry? I asked, trying to keep the exasperation out of my voice. He shook his head. It's fine, my daughter interjected quickly. He's just not a big eater. That wasn't it, though. I'd noticed how he stiffened every time food was mentioned, how his eyes darted around like he was waiting for someone to call him out. And now, here he was, sitting in silence while the rest of us devoured burgers. I could feel his gaze flicker to my plate, and then away, like a moth afraid of the flame. My stomach tightened. When we got home, I asked my daughter about it. She hesitated, then finally admitted, Alex has a thing about eating in front of people. A thing? It's called deepnophobia, she said, her tone defensive, as if the mere existence of a diagnosis absolved him of any explanation. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. It's embarrassing for him, she snapped. He doesn't want everyone to know. That's when I made my suggestion. Maybe it's better if Alex doesn't come over for meals. If he's uncomfortable, and it makes the rest of us uncomfortable, why put everyone through it? My daughter looked at me like I'd slapped her. That's so unfair, she said. You'd never say that about someone with a real disability. It's not about his phobia, I said, struggling to find the words. It's about the way he handles it. He doesn't explain, he doesn't apologize. He just disappears or stares at us. It's unsettling. She stormed off, slamming her bedroom door, leaving me in the kitchen, grappling with guilt. Was I being unreasonable? I thought about all the moments Alex had quietly derailed our meals, turning what should have been simple, joyful experiences into tense, confusing encounters. I didn't begrudge him his phobia, but wasn't it fair to ask for some acknowledgement of how his actions affected the rest of us? Later that night, I heard her talking to him on the phone. Her voice was soft, soothing, as if she were trying to convince him of something. I imagined her saying, "It's okay, they don't understand, but I do." Part of me wanted to knock on her door and explain myself, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, wondering if this was one of those moments where being a parent means being the bad guy, whether you like it or not. The fight started over a lamp. A lamp. It wasn't even an extraordinary lamp, just a tall, modern floor lamp with a fabric drum shade and a sleek black base. It stood in the corner of the living room, lit in all its mediocre glory, as Lena and I sat across from each other in a standoff that had nothing and everything to do with that stupid piece of furniture. "I don't get why this is such a big deal," she said, her voice calm but edged with frustration. "It's not like I'm asking to remodel the entire apartment. It's one thing, one nice thing." I gestured toward it, my own frustration bubbling up. "It's $400. For a lamp, Lena. A lamp. The ceiling light works just fine." She groaned, rubbing her temples. "The ceiling light makes this room look like an interrogation chamber. I want warmth, ambiance, a space that feels like home." I looked around. It already felt like home to me. Sure, the furniture was mismatched, a blend of hand-me-downs from my parents and a couch Lena had bought when she moved in. But that made it ours functional, a little chaotic, comfortable. A home wasn't supposed to look like it belonged in a magazine. It was supposed to work for the people living in it. "I just don't see how spending $400 on a lamp is worth it," I said. "It's not practical." Her eyes narrowed, and I immediately regretted the word. Lena hated that word. To her, it was shorthand for my tendency to turn every decision into a cost-benefit analysis. I could practically see the gears in her head turning, the argument she was about to make, so I cut her off. "We have other priorities," I said quickly. "The fridge is making that weird, clunking noise. And the car, don't forget the car. Plus, we still have student loans." She leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. "I know about the loans, Nate. I know about the car and the fridge. I'm not saying we buy a yacht. I'm just saying, can't we make this place feel more like us? Something that isn't just good enough for now? Do you ever think about what it would feel like to have one thing in our life that's beautiful, just because we chose it?" Her words hit harder than I expected. I'd thought about that plenty of times, but I'd learned early in life not to dwell on those kinds of thoughts. Growing up, my family's motto might as well have been make do or do without. We didn't buy new things unless the old ones stopped working entirely, and even then, there was duct tape and elbow grease before any money left the bank account. Spending hundreds of dollars on something purely for aesthetic pleasure felt like indulgence bordering on irresponsibility. "Why does it have to be this lamp?" I asked quietly. "Can't we find something cheaper?" "It's not about the lamp," she shot back, exasperated. "It's about what it represents. When I look at that lamp, I see a life where we don't just scrape by. I see a choice to have something nice even if we don't absolutely need it. And when I look at it," I said, matching her tone, "I see $400 that could go toward the car breaking down on the highway." Silence. She stared at me, her frustration softening into something else, something heavier. "Do you really think it's going to come to that? Breaking down on the highway, I mean?" I shrugged. "I don't know. But if it does, we'll be glad we didn't spend money on ambience." Lena got up and walked to the lamp. She reached out, running her fingers along the fabric shade, her expression unreadable. Then, almost as if she were talking to herself, she said, "It's not just a lamp. It's a light that makes this place feel like a home I want to come back to after work. It's a reminder that we're building something together that's more than just surviving." Her words stuck to me. I wanted to argue, but all I could do was sit there, staring at her hand on the lamp. Part of me wanted to say yes right then and there, to grab my wallet, swipe my card, and tell her she could buy every lamp in the store if it made her happy. But another part, the part that worried, that second-guessed everything, was louder. The next day, I found myself at the hardware store. I hadn't told Lena I was going, but I couldn't get her words out of my head. A light that makes this place feel like a home. I wandered the aisles, trying to find something that struck the right balance. Nice but not extravagant, functional but not soulless. Finally, I settled on a lamp that wasn't quite the sleek modern masterpiece Lena had fallen in love with, but wasn't a bare bulb on a stick either. It cost $160. Less than half the price of her dream lamp, but still far more than I'd ever imagined spending on something like this. When I brought it home, Lena was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her face a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "What's that?" she asked. "It's a lamp," I said. "Not the lamp, but a lamp. For ambience or whatever." She stood up, walking over to me slowly. Her eyes flicked between me and the box, like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. "You actually bought a lamp?" "Yeah, I figured we could use a little warmth," I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was pounding. Lena stared at me for a long moment before breaking into a smile. Not a smug, I won smile, but a real one, soft and full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. Later, as we set it up and turned it on for the first time, the room was bathed in a golden, gentle glow. It wasn't the dream lamp, but it wasn't a compromise either. It was ours, a light we'd chosen together, in the messy, imperfect way we always seem to do things. That night, as we sat under the lamp's warm glow, I realized I wasn't just looking at a piece of furniture. I was looking at something bigger, a small, fragile truce between the need to save and the need to live. "So, Ida?" The conversation started in the strangest way. Over a Pinterest board, Angela and I were scrolling through photos of wedding decor, string lights, eucalyptus runners, towering cakes, when she casually mentioned, "And of course, no kids." I paused mid-scroll, finger hovering above the screen. "What do you mean, no kids?" "You know," she said, waving her hand like it was obvious. "Child-free wedding. No crying, no running around, no sticky fingers on the cake." "Okay, sure, but Max isn't a kid," I replied without hesitation. Max, my 15-year-old son, was already taller than both of us and had the dry humor of someone twice his age. "He's practically an adult." Angela tilted her head, her dark hair sliding over one shoulder like a curtain. 15 is still a kid." I set the phone down. "He's my son." She laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that's supposed to defuse tension, but only makes it worse. "I know, but can't he sit this one out? It's one day, and we've already agreed no kids." Now, I'm not a guy who likes drama. I'm a single dad who learned early on how to keep the peace. So I kept my voice calm. "Angela, Max isn't just some guest kid. He's my son. He's family. Of course, he's going to be at the wedding." Her face hardened. "It's not about him. It's about the principle. If we let one kid come, people will think we're playing favorites." "Because we are playing favorites," I said, incredulous. "He's my kid. This isn't negotiable." Angela leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Why are you making this a fight? We're supposed to be starting a new chapter, a new family. Why do you need to bring your old life into it?" Her words hit me like a slap. "My old life?" I repeated. "Angela, Max isn't my old life. He's my present. He's my future. He's my family." "That's not what I meant," she said, but her tone was defensive, not apologetic. "I just think it's important to set boundaries. This day is about us, not about your past." We stared at each other across the table, the wedding brochures between us suddenly feeling like battle lines. I tried to explain how much it meant for Max to be there, how I'd never forgive myself if I let him feel excluded from such an important day. But every argument I made seemed to bounce off her, like she was wearing armor made of wedding traditions and Pinterest ideals. The next day, Angela doubled down. "You're being controlling," she said as I was making coffee. "I thought we agreed this was a child-free wedding, and now you're changing the rules." I put the mug down carefully so I wouldn't throw it across the room. "I'm not changing anything. I assumed it was obvious Max would be there. He's not a rule, he's my son." She rolled her eyes. "It's not like I don't like Max. I've been great with him, haven't I? I've done my part. But this is our day, and I don't want it to be about him." "That's the problem," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "You see Max as some box you have to check. But he's not optional. He's a package deal. If you don't want him, you don't want me." Angela looked genuinely shocked. "That's not fair," she said. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. It's one day." "It's not just one day," I said. "It's a statement. If he's not welcome at the wedding, what's next? Thanksgiving? Christmas? Are you expecting me to compartmentalize him out of my life because it's inconvenient for you?" She didn't have an answer to that. Instead, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my coffee and the crushing realization that maybe this wasn't going to work. I tried to push the doubts aside. Angela was stressed, I told myself. Weddings are overwhelming. She'd come around. But as the days turned into weeks, her stance didn't soften. If anything, she became more adamant, framing my insistence as an attack on her vision for the wedding. Meanwhile, I started noticing things I hadn't seen before. The way Angela talked about Max, always in the past tense, as if he were part of some chapter I'd already closed. The subtle digs she made about my ex whenever Max's mom came up in conversation. The way she avoided answering when I asked how she saw our future as a blended family. One night, I found Max sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Hey," I said, sitting down beside him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," he said without looking up. "How would you feel if Angela and I got married and you didn't come to the wedding?" He froze, his fingers hovering over the screen. "What do you mean?" "Just hypothetically," I said quickly. "If the wedding was adults only, how would that make you feel?" Max looked at me like I'd just suggested we cancel Christmas. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I guess I'd feel like, I don't know, like I wasn't part of it." His words hit me harder than I expected. I ruffled his hair, something he hated but tolerated when he knew I needed the moment more than he did. "Don't worry," I said. "You'll be there." The next morning, I called off the engagement. Angela cried, yelled, accused me of being unreasonable. But in the end, it came down to a simple truth. If she couldn't make room for Max, there was no room for her in my life. The wedding deposits were a loss, but I didn't care. On what would have been our wedding day, Max and I went to his favorite diner and split a milkshake like we used to when he was little. It wasn't the future I'd planned, but it was the one that felt right. Because love isn't just about finding someone to share your life with. It's about making sure the people who matter most feel like they belong. And Max? He's always going to belong. We were crouched in the cereal aisle, debating over whether Lucky Charms or Cocoa Puffs would make the better bait. The store was nearly empty, save for the hum of overhead lights and the occasional squeak of a distant cart, but it felt like we were planning a heist. "I'm just saying," Ava whispered, holding the Cocoa Puffs box like a prized artifact. "Lucky Charms are too obvious. Too try-hard. Cocoa Puffs are low-key. Everyone likes chocolate." "That's exactly the problem," I hissed back. "It's too broad. Too safe." Lucky Charms scream, "We're here for a good time." The marshmallows? Iconic. You bring Cocoa Puffs, and it's like you didn't even try. Ava narrowed her eyes, dropping the box into the cart with a dramatic sigh. "Fine. Lucky Charms. But when this blows up in our faces, you owe me a free pass the next time I suggest a scavenger hunt." "Deal," I said, straightening up. "Now, balloons?" Obviously, this was how planning a surprise for my brother Max always went. Ava and I in a tug-of-war, her pulling for simple and thoughtful, me pushing for something bigger and borderline ridiculous. This time the stakes were higher. Max was turning 30, and while he had the emotional range of an overcooked potato, I wanted to give him a day he'd never forget. Ava, on the other hand, believed the key to his happiness was keeping it small, personal. No big crowds, no loud noises, she kept repeating like a mantra. Max doesn't like to be fussed over. But I wasn't planning to fuss. I was planning an experience, something memorable, a proper capstone to 3 decades of existence. And if it meant some cereal-based subterfuge to win over his heart, so be it. "All right," Ava said, scanning our card as we checked out. "Explain this masterpiece of yours again. I need to know what disaster I'm signing up for." "Not a disaster," I corrected. "A triumph. First, we lure him to the park with this." I held up the Lucky Charms box. I told him we were doing a sibling nostalgia picnic. He thinks it's just us eating all the junk we loved as kids, SpaghettiOs, fruit roll-ups, you name it. "Sounds fun," she said suspiciously. "Too fun. Where's the catch?" "The catch is, once we're at the park, he stumbles upon the big reveal. A treasure hunt. Clues hidden in all his favorite childhood spots. The swings where he broke his wrist, the basketball court where he always got picked last. Ah, Toma. Perfect for a birthday. And then it all leads to the final stop, the community center where bam, surprise party." Ava groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. "A party? Of course there's a party. How many people?" "Just like 30. Close friends." Family. His co-workers who call him spreadsheet sorcerer. Nothing crazy. Nothing crazy, she said, her voice rising. Jamie. He hates being the center of attention. This is his actual nightmare. Why can't we just stick to the picnic idea? Simple, low pressure, no crowds. Because it's his 30th. Ava. That's a big deal. He deserves something more than SpaghettiOs and 2 hours on a picnic blanket. Besides, when have you ever known Max to turn down a chance to be around people he likes? He'll love it. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she bit her lip and shook her head. You don't get it, do you? It's not about the size of the gesture. It's about making him feel comfortable. Scene, a party like that? It's not for him. It's for you. I felt the sting of that, but I brushed it off. Ava didn't understand. She was too cautious, too focused on playing it safe. Max was my brother. I knew him better than anyone. Or at least I thought I did. The day of the surprise, everything went exactly as planned. The picnic setup was perfect. Mismatched blankets, a cooler full of nostalgic junk food, and a box of Lucky Charms propped up like a trophy. Max showed up in his usual flannel and sneakers, grinning in that quietly amused way he always did. "This is great," he said, sitting cross-legged on the blanket. Classic Jamie. "You didn't have to go all out, though." "Oh, this," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is just the warm-up." He raised an eyebrow. "Warm up? Let's just say there's more where this came from." The treasure hunt was a hit. At first. He laughed at the clues, rolled his eyes at the cheesy rhymes, and even jogged ahead a few times when he figured out the next location before Ava and I. But as we neared the community center, I noticed a shift. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His steps slowed, and when he finally opened the door to the surprise party, the look on his face wasn't joy. It was panic. For a moment, he froze in the doorway, blinking at the crowd of faces shouting surprise. Ava nudged him forward, but he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck like he was searching for an escape hatch. Then, with a forced smile, he stepped inside. The rest of the party felt off. Max made the rounds, shaking hands and thanking people, but he never lingered in one place for long. Every so often, I'd catch him standing by himself, staring at the floor like he was willing it to swallow him whole. Ava gave me a pointed look, but she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. Later, when the guests had gone and the balloons were starting to droop, I found Max sitting on a bench outside the center, staring at the stars. I sat down beside him, the silence stretching between us. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "It was nice. Thanks for putting it together." "You sure?" I pressed. "You seemed, I don't know, off." He hesitated, then shrugged. "It's just a lot, you know. I appreciate it. I really do. But I would have been just as happy with the picnic. Maybe happier." I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over my head. Oh, he must have seen the guilt on my face, because he gave me a small, reassuring smile. "It's not your fault. I know you meant well, and it was good seeing everyone. It really was. It's just, I'm not the big party guy. Never have been." When Ava joined us a few minutes later, she didn't say a word. She just handed Max the leftover Lucky Charms, sat down on his other side, and leaned against his shoulder. So now I'm wondering, did I mess this up? Did I let my own ideas of what a special day looks like get in the way of what Max actually wanted? AITA? When Biscuit stopped coming to the door to greet us, I knew something was wrong. For 10 years, without fail, the little corgi would bark and spin in frantic circles the moment he heard keys in the lock. But that evening, the house was eerily silent. I dropped my bag and called his name, but instead of the patter of paws, I heard only a soft, wheezy whimper from the living room. I found him curled under the coffee table, his head resting on his paws, his eyes glassy and distant. His breathing was shallow, his tail barely wagging when I knelt beside him. My heart sank. "Biscuit, what's wrong, buddy?" He didn't answer, of course, but the trust in his eyes cut me deeper than words ever could. Later that night, at the emergency vet clinic, the news came like a blow to the chest. "He has a ruptured disc in his spine," the vet explained. "It's a severe case of IVDD, intervertebral disc disease. Surgery is an option." But she paused, letting the weight of her hesitation settle. It's expensive, complicated, and the recovery is very demanding. Even then, there's no guarantee he'll regain full mobility. You could also consider humane euthanasia. That word euthanasia felt like an insult to everything Biscuit was. He wasn't just a pet. He was the furry heartbeat of our home. The idea of making that choice felt unthinkable. But as the vet talked through the specifics of surgery, the cost, the weeks of crate rest, the physical therapy, I could see Noah, my husband, shifting uncomfortably beside me. When we got home, Biscuit lying limp in my arms, Noah broke the silence. "I don't know if we can do this, Maddie." "Do what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. The surgery, the recovery, everything. What if he trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck? What if it's just too much for him? For us? I set Biscuit down gently on the couch, his little body barely moving. "You think we should just give up on him?" "That's not what I'm saying," Noah said, defensive now. I'm trying to be realistic. He's 10 years old. That surgery? It's not just a quick fix. He might never walk again. He might end up in more pain. And what if he does walk again? My voice cracked. What if this gives him more time? What if we can get him back? Noah sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. And what if it doesn't? What if we spend $10,000 and put him through hell just to watch him get worse? His words stung, but I couldn't dismiss them. The truth was I didn't know. Biscuit's odds weren't perfect. The vet had been clear. This wasn't a guarantee. But I couldn't shake the image of him trotting through the park, his little legs a blur of determination. How could I just let go without giving him a chance to be that dog again? We went to bed angry that night, each of us retreating into our own silence. Biscuit lay in his dog bed beside us, his breathing uneven, his little body curled tightly into itself. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, guilt and uncertainty gnawing at me. The next morning, I found Noah in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. Biscuit lay on a blanket nearby, his tail giving a weak thump when he saw me. Noah didn't turn when I walked in. "You know," he said finally, "when my mom was sick, there was this point where she told me she didn't want to do another round of chemo. She said it wasn't worth it anymore. She was too tired." I blinked, caught off guard. "You never told me that." He shrugged, still looking out the window. "I didn't get it at the time. I thought she was giving up. But now," he gestured toward Biscuit. "Now I wonder if it was her way of saying she just wanted peace." I walked over, wrapping my arms around him from behind. But what if Biscuit's not ready for peace? What if this isn't his time? Noah sighed, turning to face me. "And what if it is? Maddie, I'm not saying this to be cold. I just don't want to put him through something that's more for us than for him." I didn't have an answer. All I knew was the thought of losing Biscuit felt unbearable. But Noah's words stayed with me, echoing in my head as I sat on the floor with Biscuit later that day, stroking his fur while he dozed. "What do you want, buddy?" I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. "What's best for you?" That night, Noah and I sat together, Biscuit nestled between us. We talked for hours, weighing every angle, trying to balance hope with reality, love with responsibility. In the end, we made a choice. Not an easy one, and not without fear, but one we hoped was right. We went ahead with the surgery. It was grueling. The sight of Biscuit post-op, his back shaved and stitched, his legs limp and unresponsive, was almost too much to bear. The weeks that followed were harder than I ever imagined. Lifting him carefully to take him outside, coaxing him to eat, watching for signs of progress that seemed agonizingly slow to appear. Noah and I fought sometimes. We cried often. But then one day, Biscuit wagged his tail. It was small, tentative, but it was something. A week later, he managed to stand, wobbling like a baby deer. The first time he took a single, shaky step, Noah dropped to his knees and laughed through his tears. Biscuit isn't the same dog he was before. He'll never run like he used to, and some days he's stiff and tired. But he's here. He still wags his tail when we come home. He still curls up beside us on the couch, demanding belly rubs with a dramatic flop. I still don't know if we made the right choice, if it was selfish or brave or a bit of both. But when Biscuit looks at me with those trusting eyes, I think maybe it doesn't matter. All that matters is he's here and he's loved. When the call came through, I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by half-packed moving boxes and a cold pizza that was supposed to be lunch. My sister, Lena, didn't bother with a greeting. "You can't leave," she said, her voice trembling like she'd already been crying. I held the phone a little tighter. "Lena, how are you?" "I'm fine, thanks for asking." "Maya," she snapped, her tone sharper now. "Don't do that. Don't act like this is just some casual thing. You're moving across the country. Across the country. And you didn't even talk to me about it." I took a deep breath and pinched the bridge of my nose. I'd known this conversation was coming. I just didn't expect it to feel so much like trying to walk through quicksand. "Lena," I started. "It's not like I didn't think about it. I've been waiting for this promotion for years. You know that. It's my shot to finally work in environmental law, to actually make a difference. What do you want me to do? Turn it down and stay here forever?" Her silence stretched on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might have hung up. Then, quietly, she said, "You promised." I froze. "What?" "You promised," she repeated, her voice breaking. "After Dad died, you told me you wouldn't leave, that we'd stick together, that we'd be each other's family." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I remembered that night all too well. The two of us sitting on the back porch after the funeral, the sky so dark it felt like it had swallowed us whole. Lena was 17, I was 25, and we were both drowning in grief. I had promised her because I didn't know what else to say, because it felt like the only thing I could offer her when everything else had been ripped away. "Lena," I said softly, "that was 8 years ago. Things are different now." "Not for me," she shot back. "I'm still here. I stayed, Maya. I stayed to take care of Mom, to keep this stupid house running, to hold everything together while you went off and built your perfect little life." "That's not fair," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I didn't abandon you. I didn't abandon anyone. I stayed as long as I could, and then I had to leave, Lena. I had to live my life. But now you're leaving for good," she said bitterly. "And where does that leave me? Stuck here with all the responsibilities you're walking away from." Her words stung, but they weren't entirely wrong. Mom's health had been declining for years, her once sharp mind now lost in a haze of forgetfulness and confusion. Lena had taken on the brunt of it, running to doctor's appointments and managing medications while I sent money from afar and visited when I could. It wasn't equal. It had never been equal, but I didn't know how to make it fair. "You could come with me," I said suddenly, the idea spilling out before I'd had time to think it through. "What?" Lena sounded startled, like the suggestion had thrown her completely off balance. "You could come to California," I said, leaning into the idea now that it was out in the open. "Mom, too. I'll help find a place for us, a good facility for her. We could do this together, Lena. We could." "No," she interrupted. "No, I'm not uprooting my whole life just because you're chasing a dream. My friends are here. My job is here. And Mom would hate being somewhere unfamiliar. You know that." I bit my lip, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Then what do you want me to do? Give up everything I've worked for so I can stay here and keep splitting the load with you? That's not fair to me either, Lena." "Fair," she repeated, laughing bitterly. "Fair? You think this has been fair for me? You think I wanted to spend my 20s cleaning up after Mom and putting my life on hold while you sent postcards from every city you got to explore?" I flinched. "Lena, that's not." "I know it's not your fault," she said, her voice breaking again. "But it still hurts, Maya. It hurts to watch you leave and know I'm the one who'll have to pick up the pieces again." Her words left me breathless, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I hadn't wanted to see it that way. Hadn't wanted to admit that my escape had come at a cost she'd been forced to pay. But now, standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, the weight of it all pressed down on me. "Lena," I said quietly, "I'm not trying to make this harder for you. I don't know how to stay here and not feel like I'm suffocating. And I don't know how to watch you leave and not feel abandoned," she replied, her voice raw. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that felt heavy with everything we couldn't quite put into words. Finally, I said, "What if I stayed a little longer? Just until we figure something out? I could help set things up for Mom, maybe hire someone to help, and then you leave anyway." Lena finished for me. "And I'm still here." I wanted to argue, to tell her that it wouldn't be like that that we could find a solution that worked for both of us. But deep down, I knew there wasn't a perfect answer. I couldn't stay forever, and she couldn't keep carrying the burden alone. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, she said. But I guess we'll figure it out. We always do, right? Her words felt like a fragile truce, something that might shatter if I pushed too hard. So I didn't. Instead, I promised to come over the next day to talk things through in person to try to find some kind of compromise. But even as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what I chose, I'd be letting someone down. Maybe even myself.